Today's guest is David Darmanin, founder and CEO of Hotjar, the web analytics company that grew from 0 to over 100 employees in just over 4 years. So the interesting thing about my conversation with David, apart from that, he has very sort of strong opinions to share about this issue, is that his company is just at the stage where they have decided that they want to become carbon neutral, but they haven't figured out exactly how they're going to achieve that. So a lot of the conversation with David focuses around what they're trying to do there, how they're trying to build in these kinds of goals into the fabric of the company. As usual, I'll see you at the end of the episode with a few concluding thoughts. In the meantime, here's David. As you know, I'm not an expert on these issues, climate, environmentalism, blah, blah, and neither are you. Neither are most of me, I'm assuming someone, and neither are most of the people I'm speaking to. The point is, I don't think there are enough people talking about it in tech, right? Which is a shame, because there are some people who are doing some good stuff. So you mentioned on Facebook, you're doing some, we'll get into it. So this is not a sort of like, why the fuck haven't you solved the problem kind of thing. It's more of a sort of, where do you stand? What are you doing? What should we be doing? Make it okay to talk about. Let's start with the basics, just to sort of make the conversation a bit easy. Tell me a little bit about what you're up to today. What's the company doing? How large you are? What's the sort of like current, as though this was just a normal conference podcast.
Got it. This is the introduction part, not from a climate point of view.
No, this is just to sort of get into the zone of, we're talking about something that's familiar. So what's your background? What's the company doing? How large you are at the moment? Basic things like that.
Got it. Okay. So Hotjar is a software company that makes behavioral analytics software, which pretty much makes it easy for companies that are selling stuff online to easily understand how exactly their site is being used, right? We like to kind of compare it a little bit with where traditional web analytics tools kind of show you what's happening. With Hotjar, you understand a little bit why it's happening. So it's the perfect companion. The company is based out of Malta, a tiny island in the Mediterranean. But the team is actually based around 20 countries. So we've just, I think, signed our 92nd team member. So we're growing quite fast. So it's over 90 people across 20 countries. So that's, I'd say, probably one of our biggest strengths, right? A lot of diversity in the backgrounds of the team. And our product engineering sits vertically, right? So we sit in the same time zone, anywhere from Scandinavia to South Africa. But then any team that needs to be close to our customers or to our team then sits more horizontally. So that's anywhere from the West Coast, US to Tel Aviv.
Okay. How long have you been operating?
So Hotjar was founded in 2014. And we had quite a long beta program, and then we started selling in 2015.
Okay, so 4 years.
4 years operating commercially.
4 years commercial, 5 years building, running things. All right, so now obviously we know each other quite well. But even so, it would have been super easy for you to say, I don't have time for this. Super busy. This is not a conversation I'm really, an expert on, blah, blah. So why take an hour out of your time to talk about this topic if there are all these reasons or possible sort of like excuses, let's say, not to?
Yeah, good question. Look, myself and my wife, we both consider ourselves as people who care about, when I say the environment, right? I'm not saying just climate now, just in principle, we care about what's happening around us. But I think this, like in general, so obviously we do all the practical things, right? In terms of we sort our garbage, and we talk to our kids about like what's the impact of waste, and like, what happens to that package, the thing that you just bought, and the package, that what's going to happen with that. We recently built our house, and I really wanted to make sure that the house was very sustainable and automated, so I invested a lot into that. I prefer to spend money on that than on a car. So I think in our own tiny world, we care. But something happened this year which like changed things, which was seeing a young, so my wife is Swedish, right? So the connection was even bigger with Greta. Seeing a young student go out and say, this is an emergency, let's fucking talk about it, was the point where we said, holy shit, we're in a bubble. Like, we're in a fucking bubble. And like, yes, everything, like, we're doing things in our tiny lives, like as perfect as we can, not eating a lot of meat and all these things. But actually, when you think about it, what Greta did as a girl, just speak up, actually had the biggest impact. You know what I mean? In a couple of ways. One, it actually got us thinking about some deeper choices that we make as a family. And we've always traditionally loved to travel. But then you start to think, like, do we really need to go to the Caribbean in winter? Not that we go every winter to the Caribbean, but you know what I mean? When you're planning, why don't we just go on a break somewhere locally? You know what I mean? Fortunately, we live on an island. That's also made us question, should we live here? You know, it's like, it really made us question a lot of things, which is great. But I think the most important thing is, I guess, what Greta made me think about is when my kids they're now 5 and 3 years old, right? When they're 18 or 20, or not just them, maybe when their kids, right? Maybe when they are born.
So in the next 30 to 50 years, 60 years.
Yeah. And I'm going to be grumpy old man sitting on the sofa. Kind of because of the way Greta spoke, I imagine someone of that age asking me, what were you doing? You know what I mean? Like, like, what the fuck did you do? And to be honest, as in, it's not just to answer that question, but that question makes you think about, what am I really doing? Is it enough to say, oh, I put solar panels on my roof and I bought a heat pump, and you know what I mean? We didn't fly to the Caribbean. Like, is that like my answer? So that got us thinking a lot. So my wife is working on her projects. I'm not going to talk about that. So the way I thought about it is, okay, I could, and I've had this discussion with lots of people at Hotjar, right? Some people have actually come and said, you know what, I'm considering quitting my job to work on this. And I said, I'm happy to help you and talk about what makes sense. But I thought, like, it even crossed my mind, should I stop doing Hotjar and like, let's fucking do this, like, and jump onto something?
Okay.
But at the same time, I don't think I want to rush in terms of just jumping onto something. So I thought, okay, we're doing Hotjar, we're doing quite well. How can Hotjar have an impact? And I think step one was at the last meetup that we had, so where the whole company comes together. We announced that we want to become carbon neutral. So step number one, right, is that the company shouldn't have any impact. But more than that, we had already pledged 1% of Hotjar's revenue towards giving back. And that had taken a flavor of, we helped a lot of different organizations. We like to involve the team in terms of making those choices. But as of the last meetup, we said, you know what, like, rather than help a lot of tiny things, let's put all of this behind. Okay,
so this is a company policy at this point.
Yes, it's a company pledge that 1% of our revenue, which we already had, is now going towards completely the climate emergency.
Okay, perfect. So let's dig into that a little bit. Why 1%? Let me start with that.
Well, to be honest, we already had it before in terms of, well, I think the inspiration was this whole, don't know if you've heard of it, this whole 1% giving back program. So that's what inspired us pretty much. And again, you just start from somewhere. That's kind of the main reasoning. So obviously there's a lot of thought on the back of where that is going. Yeah.
Okay, so how's it happening inside the company? Is this something which You initiated as the CEO, and sort of what was the reaction inside the company? Did you have to, is this, sort of the CEO laying down the law, so it's personal opinion and this is how we're going to do it? Or what was the reaction like from the various people, the 92 people, right? So the 90 people or so.
Yeah, so at the meetup, I think it was good to just recognize with the team, like doing my part of kind of talking about it. Right? I think talking about it is so. As a CEO, I do have certain influence over the team, so at least I should leverage that.
Well,
so
you should have, otherwise.
Exactly. 70 people in the room, so I took the time to show them a video by Greta speaking, showed some facts, and said, in the past we've struggled to choose what to back, so this is what we're backing. And like there was no discussion. Like I think because we're probably very values aligned and kind of obviously our culture, we tend to hire people with the same or relatively same kind of mindset, not the same way of thinking, but similar mindset. I think everyone got the logic of us doing this, right?
Okay.
And it's easier to think we're remote, right? So we don't have a big office, but we don't have an impact. But I said we meet all together in one place, right? Think of all those flights and everything. So we have an opportunity as a remote company to think even beyond like the limits of maybe how a company might think.
Okay, so do you have somebody, is this also, you started this off. Is there somebody in the company responsible for this, or is it you? So
short term, what we did was we did it on a voluntary basis, right? So originally when we launched the whole 1% thing, this is not related to the climate piece, right? When we originally launched the 1% pledge, it was going to be 1% of our revenue and 1% of our time. But what we realized as a tiny startup that was a big mistake, right? Because like literally there's no time whatsoever at all within the company. So we decided let's kill that 1% time and let's double down on the 1% revenue. And for now, it's more on a volunteer basis. So this year, what we did was we said on a voluntary basis, whoever wants to get involved in this, there's a channel in Slack, join it, and we're going to organize ourselves. And we had, I think, 20 or 25 people out of the 70 who wanted to kind of volunteer and joined. So we split ourselves into 3 groups. And on a voluntary basis, we did research about 3 topics, which are, 1, what can we do in terms of, like, because we measured the impact that we had at that meetup where we talked about this, like what was the CO2 impact? How do we go about offsetting this, right? This happened now. So like, what can we do? Like, what is our research tells us about offsetting? Like, we already have a little bit of concerns about the whole concept of offsetting, right? Like, go jet set around the world and then like offset, and it's not expensive. So it's
we'll get into that a little bit later. I want to know more about what you're thinking there.
Good. So one team focused on researching that, and they've put forward their ideas. The second team researched organizations fighting the fight, because we said, I had read this really interesting article which said, rather than offsetting, you might want to consider giving your money to organizations that are fighting for the climate. That's probably a better way to kind of make a difference. So we had a different idea. We said, what if for every dollar we spent on offsetting, we gave the same amount to an organization fighting the fight as kind of a model?
Okay.
And then the third thing we looked at is, we're based in Malta, right? Sunshine aplenty. What if we did something locally to do like real, like offsetting in terms of what if we did something like green in that sense? So we've pretty much completed the research on all 3. So that's been exciting, but it's been a voluntary basis, raising awareness. The big difference is though that I think it was 2 weeks ago, last week, we presented the OKRs for next year, for 2020. And one of them is actually to become carbon neutral. So it's no longer now a volunteer basis thing. Now it's actually an OKR within the company, an objective we have this year. And the way we broke that down, that OKR, is 1, we need to measure our carbon footprint, because we put that on hold a little bit, because on a volunteer basis, that was going to be a nightmare.
Sure.
So now it's part of the company and employees do it on company time. The second, we chose an arbitrary number, reduce our footprint by 20%. Just chose an arbitrary number for year 1. How the hell are we going to do that? And then number 3 is offset whatever is left that we manage to reduce.
Okay, so I have a bit of experience with OKRs, and one of the ways they tend to fail, to take the sort of negative view, is you, the CEO or a CMO decides that whatever, you're increasing or reducing something by 20%, right? And then everybody goes back to their day job, right? Because what does the product team have to do with it? Unless the OKR sort of travels its way down to the individuals, if it's just your personal OKR, so it has to be part of everybody's personal goals. So have you done that yet, or do you have any ideas of how you're translating something like reduce your carbon footprint to a software engineer?
That's a good point. So the way we're doing it is that's obviously not the only OKR, right? So there are other OKRs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That would be
yeah.
So exactly, this is actually one of 4 OKRs that we have for next year. But this one in specific, so we have an ops team at Hotjar. So that's ops means more business ops. Mm-hmm. So they manage everything from finance to legal to travel, choosing locations for meetups and whatnot. So the way we are handling it is, let's take the first key result, right, which is measure our impact. And that's going to be owned by our ops team. In conjunction, we plan to bring someone from the outside, an expert that's done this before, that hopefully will be asking us for what are the inputs, what do we need to measure and give to them so that they can help us with this, right? We're a tiny company, doing this internally would be a mistake. But similarly, we also have resources internally that can help with this, right? We've got our BI team and whatnot that can help with how do we think about measuring this. So I think how it's going to cascade, we still haven't defined exactly. With the reducing part, the plan is actually, once we know that data, we have a model at Hotjar of organizing company-wide events, which are called bonfires. So we plan to involve the wider team in terms of brainstorming and thinking about collectively.
These are sort of Slack-based events, you mean, online events?
No, they're Zoom actually events.
Oh, so, okay, but not in-person events.
No, not in person.
Okay.
Zoom event. So it's a bonfire session. So where we're planning to discuss this and brainstorm about what are the things that we could actually do to reduce. And then obviously where that decision goes, it's very likely it's going to be in the ops team, right? So for example, random idea, maybe we should do, instead of doing a meetup in person, because we do twice a year, maybe one of them, we test a remote one next year. That automatically kills 20%, right? Much more than 20%, because flights are a big thing for us. So I don't think it's going to be that complicated to kind of make the decision, but I think a lot of it is going to go to the ops team.
Okay. I hope this is not how they're finding out.
No. We've discussed with them. No, the reality is actually the way we're doing it is we have. So the way we're doing it is we've set these top line OKRs. Now all teams within the business are putting forward their ideas, and then we're meeting up in 2 weeks in Lisbon to actually align and kind of sound off these objectives from each other and decide on the cascading, the bottoms up together.
Okay, so just to go back quickly to your meetup, you said you had a meetup where you discussed it, right? You showed the video, and you mentioned about tried to measure your footprint at this point.
No, we didn't.
You haven't. You just said that you want to. Okay.
So the decision we took was, it's a volunteer basis, and this is still the initial stages. And we knew we were going to set the OKR for next year, right? We were starting to think about it, but we didn't want to waste time. So what we said was, rather than try and measure it perfectly, right, which is very complicated, involves a lot of people, we said, let's double down on flights. Let's understand the flights we used for the last meetup. What is that an equivalent to?
So you measure the footprint of the meetup to some extent. Okay.
Just to start with that, how big of a challenge is this? Is it like a case of we're like, oh, this is nothing? Actually, it was substantial already.
Okay, so how hard was that, and what did you find out?
We chose that because it's quite easy in the sense that if what we did is we looked at, the team did actually on a volunteer basis. They looked at all the flights that we did, and then we looked at the kilometers traveled. There's a calculator where you can put it in, and it tells you the CO2 overall impact. We increased that by 15-20% just to be safe, and we said this is probably the rough impact of the meetup.
Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Which is then, if you build a process, it's something quite easy to do for your everyday travel and other things. All right, so you also mentioned that you have some issues with carbon offsets, and that's not the best way of dealing with the problem. Well, why? What's wrong with carbon offsets from your point of view, or from what you've learned so far? I mean, I have
Yeah,
my own
again,
opinion, which I want to get into right now.
we're not experts in any way, right? But in discussing this within the team, as in there's a lot to be said about the business side of things behind offsets, right? So in like anything, the moment there's money being exchanged, kind of, again, it's good to be a little bit, what's the right word, skeptical about, like, are these offsets really offsets and how are they working?
Right.
And then also, like, how are they calculated, right? Because if you're giving money to an organization to plant trees, how long does it take? Time does it actually take to actually achieve this offset? You know what I mean? So it requires careful thought and understanding of what exactly are you spending money on. Like, there's a lot of websites out there which is put in your CO2, get out your credit card, you're done. So we want to go
Exactly.
much
Which is a
deeper than
sort
that.
of like just guilt-free way, just trying to get rid of your guilt, basically, rather than actually doing something.
Yeah.
So you said you've completed some of the research at this point on what organizations you might support and what local projects you might do, right? Can you share what those are?
No, I'm joking.
Well, I mean, it's a yes or no question.
No, I can. A little bit of a teaser, mainly because like everything is really in progress at this
Yeah, to
stage.
whatever extent you can, right? I mean,
Yes,
maybe even
yeah.
what kinds of organizations, if you don't want to mention a specific one.
Yeah, so with regards to offsets, it's still very wide open. So the team put forward like 5-6 different ideas, and we're still discussing them. So they vary from anywhere to investing into, for example, wind power project. For example, the UN website lists some of these projects that you can back and get involved in. There's some others which involve, for example, investing into reforestation. There's different ideas, so we still need to discuss them. So far, it's kind of more of a menu to be discussed. But there's also like a research piece which I couldn't, for the like if my life depended on it, quote from this document. I just read it quickly. But we have a sync call about it next week. So that's how much in progress we are. With regards to the other project, which is the solar concept in Malta, this is still, again, very early stages. But this all kind of kicked off from me realizing when I built the house, like, and we put solar panels on the roof, understanding the calculation and the feed-in tariff we have in Malta, I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then seeing the school where my kids go to, they're a foundation, right? So they're not a commercial institution. Massive roof space, not one solar panel. Really need money to run to run the school, and recently I've been sending out like newsletters about let's become more climate conscious. So that I had this light bulb moment of, as we're putting aside this capital, we've got quite a lot now. Like, we've got in this giving back fund, we've got close to 300,000 euros to deploy. So we were thinking, what if, right? And this is still a big if, just to give an example. What if we worked with these schools to help them install? So we actually finance the solar panels on their roofs. We can couple that with educating, like talk to the kids, do activities around solar panel, and we have got a solar panel on the roof of your school. Here's how it works, why it's important. We'd also, for every system that we put together, like solar panels, we'd also look at how do we either protect or invest into forests around the world to kind of, because even solar panels have a carbon footprint, right?
Well, this is one of the problems. One of the problems when you start digging into this, it becomes one of those. What's the expression of? Well, it's a vicious circle, right? Basically, I mean, even this Zoom call, right? One of the conversations I was having a few weeks ago with somebody who is a designer. You know, once you start looking at everything, basically, if you exist, you have a carbon footprint, and it's not the right, it's a sort of, it's a logical trap, right?
It
Then
is. It is.
so
I think that's a super good point because I think in my opinion, the biggest mistake is trying to be a purist, right? If you're a purist, I think like the stage we're at in the problem is awareness. So I think if we're going to be purists, I think there could be a problem with the message in terms
or what
of
do you mean by purist?
a purist means that don't buy the solar panels because they have a solar impact, like a carbon impact.
Mm-hmm.
Like essentially, to your point, we're human, we exist. So you know what I mean. The only way, what are we gonna do? Mass suicide is the only solution. You know what I mean? But you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
it's easy to be extreme. So I think the most important thing is, first off, I think we need to think about what's the most important, which is reducing, right? Like reducing is by far the most important conversation. But I think there's also many projects that can be done. Like in our case, like Hotjar, like we can reduce, but there's a limit to how much that reduction can have an impact. I think it's more interesting to think about how can we use our pledged revenue to get that message out there, to educate, to talk about the subject, and have an impact.
So let's talk a little bit about reducing, because reducing anything except churn is exactly what nobody talks about in software, right? In anything, but any conference you go to, any blog you read, it's all about growth, right? It's more funding, more customers, blah, blah, blah. The only thing we want to reduce is churn and acquisition costs, basically. So what's the balance there? Because basically, if you grow as a company, you are emitting more shit, basically, when you get down to it. But then if you choose to not grow, then you're almost automatically going to decline and fade away. So what's your thinking about that?
It's a great question, right? So first off, like I'm not a big fan of growth for the sake of growth, but the reality is no one is standing still. Nothing is standing still, right? Not even a freaking river is standing still. So everything is moving, everything is changing. So yeah, I think if you're a startup, if you're a business, you probably have a vision, or hopefully you have a fucking purpose. That's the most important thing. And then I think if you have a purpose and a vision, and hopefully it's rooted in a good purpose, then growth is good. So in our case, for example, at Hotjar, what we focus on is we think the future is a future where more companies deliver better experiences to their customers, right? So that's what our vision speaks about. We try to do it also so we don't have funding, we don't have investors, we don't have any pressure to do it, but still we think about like big, hairy, audacious goal, right? How do we reach 100,000 organizations? How do we empower 100,000 organizations to care about the customer experience? So I think there's different types of growth, but at the same time, we live in a capitalistic world, right? So in a way, it's kind of pointless for us to be thinking, you know what I mean? Like there shouldn't be growth. So I think the best way to think about it is how are we measuring growth, right? So the best example would be, in this case, countries, right? So countries measure more than anything their economic growth.
Yeah.
Right. So and every country would love to have 5% economic growth.
I mean, economic growth and GDP and things like that.
Or GDP,
net imports versus export, things like that. Those are the things we judge how well a country is doing at the moment.
But exactly. But I mean more in terms of generically economic, right? So the problem is though, if you achieve that level of growth, let's say you grow your economy and GDP by 5% every year, that's doubling in how many years? That's insane. Right?
I can't work it out off the top of my head, but you're talking like
probably like 10 years. Yeah,
it's
10
like
years.
10 to Somebody's gonna watch this and be commenting.
Probably. But so the point is like, is that sustainable? Like, is this the future that we want for the planet, and where does that take us? You know what I mean? So in reality, we need to start measuring just growth differently. Like, what is the quality of life of people living in a country, right? So similarly, what is the quality of work or life of people within a company. So the objective that we have at Hotjar, instead of we don't have investors, the way we think about it is, yes, we do want to grow, but then we ask how. And we've defined it as we want to be a sustainable, long-lasting business. So that means profitable. That means we think about the impact we have with with happy team members and happy customers. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
And
So
we think that's enough.
At what point do you then start becoming more, what's the word, discriminatory on the kind of customers you have, right? So, for example, just to give you, I used to work for an online publishing company, Automatic, right? We always had an internal conversation that goes around there, was always around freedom of speech, right? Is your role at all to sort of censor anything? And there were some lines which the company did not allow people to cross. So, let's say, have you discussed at all, for example, either in one way enabling the kind of customers that would be aligned with your vision versus not serving customers who aren't aligned with your vision? So let's say somebody who is a climate change denier, for example, to take this example, right? They're using your tool to improve their website promoting jobs in coal mining, for example. Is that something you've discussed? Does it bother you?
Oh, that's an interesting one. No, we haven't discussed it, potentially because it's still early on, and also because Hotjar is now used on over 500,000 sites. So I wouldn't even want to imagine what it would take to kind of vet that. So Hotjar, our initial vision was actually more about democratization and access. So we've more focused on just giving the ability to build better experiences to anyone, whether you're a student or a startup or even a big business where you can't secure budget to do this stuff.
Right.
So yeah, we haven't thought about this, to be honest, but so far we're not thinking about it that way yet. We're not thinking about how do we block people. Like I'm honestly,
not even saying you should
it's
block,
a good,
right?
It's a good question. Yeah, I guess we haven't thought about it because in terms of identifying opportunities, it's probably such a tiny opportunity that, let's face it, if we blocked a coal mining company from using Hotjar, I don't think it's going to have a big impact.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, so two last things, and then we can wrap it up. So you're mentioning before about, touch briefly on sort of the idea of being like a purist, right, or extreme action or things like that.
I knew this was going to come back.
Yep. And you probably know where I'm going. Climate strikes, Extinction Rebellion, these kinds of activities. Have you had people striking in your company at Hotjar?
Yes.
Is it okay for people to strike? What has the conversation been like there?
Yeah.
And what do you generally think about the Extinction Rebellion approach?
So, look, by purist, what I meant is not that, right? So I am a big supporter of any form of protest, whatever it is, right? So if we think about democracy, that's like the God-given right that we have, right, in terms of humans and accepting the way our society is run. So I'm all for that. We were caught a little bit off guard by the protest, which is shameful because it was still early on in our education as a company about this, in the sense that we had some people who wanted to protest and we were like, yeah, go ahead. And they suggested, can you please tell everyone that they're allowed to protest? And this was like, we had 24 hours to do this. I remember I was traveling and our like operational team had a good point, which is, whoa, let's not rush into this, because what does it mean if we tell them they're okay to protest? Is it okay to protest only for climate, or can anyone protest any week about anything?
Mm-hmm.
So we were caught unprepared because this requires some thought to think about, like, what's the company policy? How do we approach it and whatnot?
Yeah.
I think it should become easier now that, like, we have lined ourselves behind the whole climate piece. So I think we need, though, to make it a little bit more real within the company, of writing up some kind of ethos or what we believe in, which makes it easier to take these decisions of, we do support strikes for climate, but not supports for death row. You know what I mean?
Right.
Support meaning it's okay, everyone can just leave work, right? Then again, it's not to say that if someone decides not to come to work because they want to protest a cause they believe in, that we're going to react in some way. So we'll take it on a ad hoc basis.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
It
So
quickly becomes complicated, right?
it
When you think
does.
about
It does. And once you start, because some companies I've spoken to are sort of thinking about this as, it's a backdrop to everybody's existence at the moment. Doesn't matter where you live, what you do. Whereas, to just use the example that you used, the sort of like death row capital punishment thing is not really a backdrop that is present in every society, right? So there is maybe a sort of a difference there. But it depends on the personal opinions of the founders, the people running the company. And
random example, I guess what they meant was, what happens if every week someone wants to protest about someone? Then how do we make the distinction of why we've supported one thing and not the other? So all I'm saying is it made for an interesting conversation. For me, it was a no-brainer, right? I'm the type of impulsive CEO to tell everyone, fucking go out and protest, because it's the climate. But they're like, okay, how are we going to justify this decision? My answer to that was simple, right? Like, we care about the climate, so we support that. But
which is actually a consideration you need to take on a personal level as well. So if you're striking, let's say you're self-employed, right? At that point, you're at how much time off can you take from work? Because then there's a livelihood issue. So there's a livelihood of the company. If you're arrested, given the kind of protests we've had here in the UK, that's an even bigger issue. So one last thing. You've been around many conferences and other events, usually I think very often as a speaker, right? Has this been a topic that has been coming up with other leaders or CEOs? I don't see it as a topic in conferences. Like I haven't seen a conference like SaaS Talk or similar with a track or even one talk about this topic. So it's not something people talk about. Why? Why do you think we don't talk about this?
Everyone's so busy wanting to grow. That's the truth, though. So in fact, this is the next stage of another reason why I like the idea of solar panels. Solar panels is just one example. I think the higher level concept is, what if business invested more into renewable energy with no need to get a return from it? You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the idea. So long term, it's still a very early pilot project. We don't even know if this is feasible. But if it took off, I like the idea of investing into something like this, because it allows you to spin it off into a separate entity which generates revenue, right? Because solar panels generate money. So it means all of a sudden you're creating a foundation. So then what if I could, if again, we're thinking a lot of steps ahead, what if I could go and speak to other CEOs and tell them, give your 1% of your revenue into this foundation, which is not a Hotjar's now, it's on its own. But that's a lot of work away. But I guess as part of me thinking of what can I do, I'm in software, right? I'm a CEO, I know other CEOs. How can I get business to kind of back this in the way business knows how to do it, right? Which is, we should put our money where our mouth is, right? Let's pledge some money, or for some people maybe time, to support the cause.
Okay, well, I'll keep that in mind for for future guests. Okay, so just to conclude, you get some people who are very depressed about this topic, and I think a lot of people who are, they go black to white. 1 minute you're sort of optimistic, 1 minute you're a bit sort of. That's sort of what Extinction Rebellion is about, in a lot of ways. You sound pretty optimistic overall, at least in this conversation. What makes you be optimistic? What's the sort of like frame? What's the way to think about this, which isn't, oh, we're all fucked?
Look, I think overall I'm not optimistic at all, right? So
Okay,
I'm
that's a
I'm
great
from
way
the
to end the
Mediterranean.
conversation.
Yeah. I'm from the Mediterranean. I love the Mediterranean lifestyle and mindset, like, well, not mindset, sorry, the lifestyle, the weather, like the way of life. It's it's because we're from here, right? Like it's something I appreciate. To think that within our kids' lifetime, the Mediterranean might no longer be what it was, it's difficult not to be pessimistic about that. The fact that I get to the point where we sometimes think about, oh shit, like should we consider moving because Malta is going to become a desert? Like again, it's very difficult to be positive about this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I'm positive about is the new generation, right? Like the different way of thinking of, like I think it's difficult because we come from from a different, like even childhood and way of thinking, that it's so easy to make compromises. Like I'm making compromises, right? Like I said, I should probably drop Hotjar and go fucking fight this, but I'm saying, but you know what? Like this is what I know, so let me do Hotjar and fight this in this way. That's a compromise. Let's face it. If I really believed in an emergency, I would drop everything and go. So really, hopefully, like the hope sits with the new, like us getting out of the way of the new generation, supporting them, empowering them, and again, putting our money where our mouth is if you're an entrepreneur, or putting where your time where your mouth is. Again, like it's these things, right? So more than anything, getting out of the way. Um, that's the scary part. I think I'll never forget, right? So this is kind of an interesting topic that it's so weird that it sits with me. When I was in school, I was in, I had one of the credits that I had, I think it was in college, which was about the environment and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this topic within it, which was called Tragedy of the Commons, which is why we have a like why we foresee a problem, which is the fact that while it's obvious we're generating waste and there's a problem. So this is a long time ago, right? So I'm going to be 39. This was like, 20 years ago in school. We're saying the problem is the tragedy of the commons. That while it's clear there's a problem, everyone says, yeah, but everyone is fucking doing it, so I'll do it as well. And I think that's the main thing to be negative about, which is it's very difficult to work against the tragedy of commons. And I think that's what I see around me. And that's why I think we need to talk about this topic. This is the most important thing, whether it's a protest or a CEO at a meetup or whatever. Go probably less about Facebook, which is an echo chamber, more get out and speak to the person you buy your groceries from. You know, talk about it. Like I think phase one is talking about it. So.
Okay, so on the topic of talking about it, if somebody is working in a company where this is not a topic of conversation, right? What is the best way of bringing up a difficult topic in, let's say, in a sort of in a company where, I mean, you have a company, you might have companies where if you bring up something tricky like this, you're liable to be fired. That might not be the company we're talking about. But I think a lot of companies in our space pride themselves with being at least open to kind of conversations. How do you talk about something like this to a CEO who has other things on his or her mind at the moment? What's an interesting angle to bring this up?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, right? Because typically my answer to these questions, when it's how do you convince your boss to go to an event or buy software or everything, you write a business case, right? That's the best way to pitch an idea. So how the fuck do you write a business case to care more about the climate? So I guess that's the challenge, right? What is the business case? Maybe it's hiring more people or talk about like the impact that the company can have. But I think it's all about, you need to build a case. Like that's what like executives like to see data or information structured in that way. Mm-hmm. So I think it's all about the business case.
Okay, perfect. I think we can probably stop there. Hello there, me again. Hope you enjoyed that. That was Dave Darmanin of Hotjar talking to me about the climate emergency and what his company is doing internally to help the situation and be more carbon neutral. Please drop me any feedback you have on our social channels or else by email on richard@fatalair.blog. I encourage you to visit our website, subscribe to the mailing list for updates, and if you'd like to help out, please visit our page fatalair.blog/contribute. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.